Hi, I'm Aviva Lauer Golbert, and I am speaking to you all the way from the Pardes Institute in Jerusalem. Karpas is one of my favorite parts of the Seder, and there are really two reasons for that. First of all, I love vegetables and I love dips. I love hors d'oeuvres, I love crudités, and the idea of being able to start off one Seder meal with dipping vegetables into salt water or other types of dips is really enjoyable for me. The second reason, though, I think is probably the more important one, and that is because Karpas is probably one of the best examples of how all of the ritual foods that we eat or we talk about or look at the Seder table are not clear. It's not obvious whether the reason that we are eating them and talking about them is in celebration of freedom or in commemoration of slavery, because each food really has both sides to it. So for the Karpas example, let's just use the potential parsley, right? Parsley is one of those things that a lot of people use for Karpas, and they're going to dip it into the salt water, right? If you think about the parsley is so sharp and bright. It's a delicious spring kind of vegetable or herb, right? So this can make us think about new birth. It's green. It's the birth of a nation, and we are free. On the other hand, if you think of parsley looking like this, right? Sort of like a paintbrush, and you imagine that this actually is not parsley, but the type of hyssop that God told the children of Israel in Egypt to use to dip in the blood and paint their doorposts so God would know to pass over their houses. One might imagine, right? This parsley, this paintbrush, this isn't actually something that's necessarily celebrating freedom. You could think about it that way, but you could also think about it as something that reminds us of that really scary nervousness, anxiety that the Israelites really must have felt that night. How did they know it was going to work? How did they know that what God told them to do was actually going to come to be? So I think on the one hand, this can represent delicious newness, celebration of freedom. And on the other hand, it can also commemorate that feeling of we are slaves and we're not sure that we're going to get out of here. And at the same time, I would say that the salt water that we dip the Karpas into can also represent all kinds of different things. On the one hand, it often is, we talk about it celebrating the leaving of Egypt, because it is like the waters of the Red Sea, and that is how the Israelites went to freedom. So if you think about that as the sea and as their way of getting to freedom, that is a celebratory food for us to eat. On the other hand, you might think about it as the sweat and tears that the slaves cried and sweat for such a long time, for so many hundreds of years. And that is a memory. That is a commemoration of something that was really hard and sad. One might even think about it in a third way, on a third hand, and that has to do with the blood of the first plague. That is something that was really hard for the Egyptians and probably very distressing for the Israelites as well. So there's so many different ways to look at these foods, and that is an example for us that there are so many different ways to look at all of the ritual foods of the Seder evening.